The smell of roasted garlic and lemon drifted through my kitchen long before the guests arrived. I had always believed that a home should welcome people before you even open the door. At 64, it was one of the few traditions I refused to give up. I adjusted the table runner for the third time, smoothing invisible wrinkles with my palm. The dining room looked warm, almost glowing under the soft yellow lights. 6 chairs, polished. Wine glasses aligned. Plates set just the way my late husband used to like them, slightly angled, as if presentation alone could make the food taste better. Old habits stayed longer than people. Mom, do we really need 3 desserts? Daniel's voice echoed from the hallway. I smiled despite myself. 1 is for eating, 1 is for seconds, and 1 is in case your wife decides she doesn't like the first 2. He laughed awkwardly. That laugh had changed over the years. It used to be full and careless. Now it always felt like it was checking for approval first. I'm just saying, he added, stepping into the kitchen. Clara doesn't eat much sugar. That's funny, I said lightly, not looking at him. She didn't seem to mind the chocolate cake last Christmas. Daniel didn't answer. He never did when it came to Clara. I turned to face him then. He looked older than his 42 years tonight. Tired. There were faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who would run into this very kitchen after school, asking what was for dinner before even taking off his shoes. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing, he said too quickly. We're just, busy. Busy. That word had become a wall between us. Before I could press further, the doorbell rang. They're here, he said, already turning away. Of course they were. Clara walked in first as always. Tall, composed, dressed like she had somewhere more important to be afterward. She offered me a brief smile, the kind you give a coworker, not family.
Beatrice, she said.
The house looks nice.
Nice.
Thank you, I replied. Dinner's almost ready. She stepped inside, scanning the room as if she were evaluating it. Daniel followed behind her, carrying a bottle of wine I knew I had probably paid for one way or another. Where should I put this? He asked. On the table is fine. Clara had already moved toward the living room, setting her purse down with deliberate care. I hope it's not too heavy, she said. I've been trying to eat lighter lately. I paused. The chicken, the potatoes, the sauce. It was the same meal she had once called comforting. Back when she still tried. You can take what you like, I said evenly. Dinner began quietly. The clinking of forks and the occasional polite comment filled the space where conversation used to live. Daniel tried. I could see that much. He asked about my week, about the garden, about whether I had seen the neighbor's new dog. But every question felt like it had a time limit. Clara, on the other hand, barely touched her food. Halfway through the meal, she set her fork down. I think we should talk about something, she said. There it was. Daniel stiffened beside her. I kept my expression neutral. Of course. She folded her hands together, as if preparing for a business meeting. This arrangement, she began, isn't really working anymore. I didn't need to ask what she meant. The house. Their house. Or rather, my house. Technically, it was still in my name. Years ago, when Daniel and Clara couldn't qualify for a mortgage, I had stepped in. I told myself it was temporary, that they would eventually take over. Years passed. The payments didn't. What part isn't working? I asked calmly. Clara glanced at Daniel before answering. It's just complicated, she said. Having you so involved. Involved. I repeated. Yes, she said, her tone sharpening. Financially. It creates pressure. Pressure. I felt something shift inside me, but I didn't let it show. I see, I said. The monthly payments I make are causing you stress. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, that's not exactly what she... It's not just the money, Clara cut in. It's the expectation that comes with it. I leaned back slightly. Expectation. That we owe you something, she said. That everything we do is somehow under your control. Silence settled over the table. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. I've never asked you for anything, I said. Clara laughed softly, not kindly. You don't have to, she said. It's implied. Daniel looked down at his plate. That hurt more than anything she had said. So let me understand, I continued, keeping my voice steady. You feel burdened because I helped you buy your home? Clara met my gaze directly. I feel like we can't live our lives freely, she said, because you're always there, in the background, watching, judging. I blinked. Watching, judging. The words echoed louder than they should have. I visit maybe once every 2 weeks, I said quietly. That's not the point, she replied. It's the presence, the influence. Daniel finally spoke. Maybe we just need some space, Mom.
Space.
I looked at him then, really looked. Space from what? I asked. He hesitated. From all of this. All of this. I felt something inside me go still. I sold your father's workshop, I said slowly. You remember that? Daniel frowned. What does that have to do with? It paid your down payment, I continued. I gave up something that mattered to me, so you could have a start. Clara shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. That was your choice, she said. I turned to her. Yes, I agreed. It was. The room felt colder somehow. And I've never once held it over your heads, I added. Clara's lips tightened. No, she said. You just remind us in other ways. Daniel stood abruptly. Okay, maybe we should calm down. No, I said. My voice surprised even me.
No.
Let's not calm down. Let's be honest. I looked at both of them. For years, I've supported you, I said. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because you're my family. Daniel's expression softened, but Clara's didn't. And now, I continued, you're telling me that support is a burden. Clara crossed her arms. I'm saying it comes with strings, she replied. I let out a small breath. Then maybe, I said quietly, it's time we cut them. Daniel froze. Mom, I think you're right, I said, standing up. This arrangement isn't working anymore. Clara's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe. Beatrice, we didn't mean.
No, interrupte Jeanly.
You meant exactly what you said. I walked to the kitchen, needing a moment to steady myself. When I returned, they were both standing. I'll speak with the bank this week, I said. We'll figure out next steps. Daniel looked panicked now. What does that mean? It means, I said, meeting his eyes, things are going to change. No one spoke after that. They left 10 minutes later. The house fell silent again, just like it always did. But this time it felt different. Not empty.
Clear.
I stood in the dining room, looking at the untouched dessert, the half-full glasses, the chairs pushed slightly out of place. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering how to fix things. I was wondering if I should. And that question scared me more than anything Clara had said. The house felt too quiet the morning after dinner, not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to enjoy, but the kind that presses against your ears and forces you to think. I didn't turn on the radio like I usually did. I didn't make coffee right away either. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with nothing but a glass of water and the memory of Clara's voice repeating in my head, strings attached. I had gone to bed telling myself I wouldn't let it get to me, that people say things in the heat of the moment, that family always finds its way back. But by morning, the words had settled deeper, heavier, like they'd found a permanent place somewhere inside my chest. I finally stood up, made coffee out of habit more than desire, and carried the mug to my small office at the back of the house. It was a room I rarely used for anything serious anymore, just bills, paperwork, the occasional letter, but that day it felt like the only place where I could face things honestly. I opened the drawer where I kept my financial documents, the one I hadn't really gone through in years because I never thought I needed to. I trusted my system. I trusted that things were under control. More importantly, I trusted Daniel. I spread everything across the desk. Bank statements, mortgage documents, old receipts, even handwritten notes I had kept from years ago. At first, I told myself I was just organizing, just checking. But within minutes, I realized I wasn't organizing anything. I was uncovering something I had been avoiding for a long time. The numbers didn't feel real at first. They looked like someone else's life, someone else's decisions. Monthly payments, transfers, large withdrawals that I vaguely remembered agreeing to but had never fully added up in my head. I grabbed a pen and started writing everything down, line by line, forcing myself to see it clearly. 8 years of mortgage payments, repairs, emergencies, short-term help that had quietly turned into permanent support. The total kept growing, and with it, a strange mix of disbelief and clarity. By the time I finished, my hand was trembling slightly. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the number at the bottom of the page. It wasn't just money, it was time, security, the future I had always assumed I would have. For years, I had told myself it was worth it, that helping Daniel was what any good mother would do, that sacrifices were part of love. But sitting there, looking at the full picture for the first time, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. This wasn't just help. It had become something else entirely, something that had no end, no boundaries, no balance. And the worst part wasn't even the money. It was the realization that, to them, it wasn't even seen as a gift anymore. It was expected. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of my thoughts. Daniel. Of course it was. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Mom, he said, sounding tense, have you thought about what we talked about? I closed my eyes briefly. No, how are you? No acknowledgement of last night. Straight to it. I've been thinking, I said carefully. Good, he replied quickly, because we really need to figure this out. Things are getting tight. Tight, I repeated, glancing at the papers in front of me. Yeah, he said. We've got some bills piling up, and Clara's business has been slow this month. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. Instead, I picked up the page I had just written on. Daniel, I said, how much do you think I've given you over the years? There was a pause. What kind of question is that? Just answer me. I don't know, he said, clearly uncomfortable. We never kept track like that. I did, I said quietly. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, he said slowly. It's over 300,000, I continued, not including the mortgage. Silence. I don't see why that matters right now, he finally said, his tone shifting. Of course he didn't. It matters because I've never actually said it out loud before, I replied. I've never asked you to see it. Mom, we've always appreciated. Have you? I interrupted, not raising my voice but not softening it either. He hesitated again. Of course we have. Then why did Clara say I was holding it over your heads? That's not what she meant, he said quickly. She was just frustrated. Frustrated with what? With the situation, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Look, can we not do this right now? We just need help getting through this month. There it was. The pattern, clear as ever. The conversation always circled back to the same place. How much? I asked, even though I already knew what he would say. 10,000, he replied after a brief pause. Just to stabilize things. 10,000.
Just.
I looked down at the numbers on my desk again, then out the window at the yard I had spent years maintaining, the house I had kept not for myself, but for the idea of family. I can't, I said. The silence on the other end was immediate and sharp. What do you mean you can't? He asked. I mean I'm not going to, I corrected. His voice changed completely then, losing any trace of softness. So that's it? After everything, you're just cutting us off. After everything? I repeated, almost in disbelief. We're your family, he said, as if that explained everything. I know, I said. And I've acted like it for years. That's not fair, he snapped. You're acting like we've done something wrong. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. I'm not saying you're wrong, I said slowly. I'm saying this isn't working anymore. So, what? You're just going to let us fail? The question hung in the air, heavy and manipulative in a way I was only just beginning to recognize. No, I said. I'm going to let you take responsibility. That's unbelievable, he muttered. Maybe it was. Maybe, to him, it always would be. I have an appointment at the bank tomorrow, I added. I need to understand my situation clearly. Your situation? He said, almost scoffing. What about ours? That's exactly the point, Daniel, I replied. I've been living in your situation for years. He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. I don't even recognize you right now, he said. I swallowed hard, feeling the sting of that more than I expected. Maybe that's because I'm finally recognizing myself, I said quietly. I hung up before he could answer. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at nothing, letting the silence settle again. But this time, it felt different. Not as heavy. Not as suffocating. There was something else underneath it, something unfamiliar but steady.
Clarity.
For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't fixing. I wasn't stepping in to make everything easier. I was just seeing things as they were. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, placed them back in the folder, and set it by the door so I wouldn't forget it for my appointment. My hands were still slightly unsteady, but my mind wasn't. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Things were going to change. The next morning felt sharper somehow, like the world had edges I hadn't noticed before. I dressed more carefully than usual for my bank appointment, choosing a navy blouse and simple slacks, the kind of outfit that made me feel composed even when I wasn't. On the drive there, I kept replaying my conversation with Daniel, not the words themselves, but the tone, the shift in it, the way concern had turned into accusations so quickly. It was unsettling, but it also confirmed something I had been slowly realizing. This was a new behavior. It had just finally become impossible for me to ignore. The financial advisor, a woman named Mrs. Clark, greeted me with a polite smile that didn't quite hide the seriousness in her eyes once we sat down. I handed over my documents, watching as she reviewed them, her expression tightening ever so slightly with each page. She didn't interrupt, didn't comment right away, and somehow that silence said more than any immediate reaction could have. When she finally looked up, she folded her hands on the desk and spoke in a calm, measured tone that felt almost rehearsed. Beatrice, she said, I'm going to be very honest with you, because I think you need that right now. You've been incredibly generous, but financially, you're in a vulnerable position. I nodded, bracing myself. If nothing changes, she continued, turning her screen slightly so I could see the projections, your current savings will not sustain you through retirement the way you expect. The ongoing mortgage payments, combined with your previous withdrawals, are significantly impacting your long-term stability. Seeing it laid out like that, numbers, graphs, timelines, was different from anything I had felt at my kitchen table. There was no emotion here, no family context, no justification. Just facts. Cold, precise, undeniable. What are my options? I asked. She didn't hesitate. You need to reduce your financial obligations immediately. That means stopping any non-essential outflows and reassessing liabilities, especially that mortgage. The word mortgage landed heavily. I'm the primary borrower, I said. The house is technically mine. Then you have leverage, she replied, but also responsibility. If those payments continue, they will continue to affect you, not them. I thanked her, gathered my papers, and walked out of the bank feeling like I had just stepped into a different version of my life, one where I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I found myself driving past Daniel's neighborhood without really deciding to. The streets were quiet, lined with identical manicured lawns and large houses that all seemed to compete with one another in subtle ways. I slowed as I approached their house, my hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. But then I noticed something new. A truck parked in the driveway with a company logo I didn't recognize. Another vehicle was parked along the curb, and there were two men walking toward the backyard carrying what looked like equipment. My stomach dropped before my mind fully caught up. I pulled over across the street, my heart beginning to race. Through the open gate, I could see into the yard just enough. There were markings on the ground, bright spray paint outlining shapes in the grass. One of the men was holding what looked like a blueprint, pointing to different sections while speaking to someone I couldn't fully see. Then Clara stepped into view. She was smiling. Not just smiling, laughing. Relaxed, confident, completely at ease. She gestured toward the yard, nodding enthusiastically as the man explained something. There was no stress in her posture, no tension in her expression. This wasn't someone drowning in financial trouble. This was someone planning something expensive. A cold realization settled over me, slow and heavy. I didn't need to hear the words to understand what I was looking at.
A pool.
I sat there longer than I should have, watching the scene unfold, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I had been told just hours earlier. $10,000 for urgent bills. Desperation. Pressure. And yet here they were, discussing what was clearly a luxury project. I didn't confront them. I didn't even step out of the car. Something told me this wasn't the moment for confrontation. This was the moment for clarity. I drove home in silence, the image replaying in my mind over and over again. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the confusion I had been feeling all week had transformed into something else entirely, something steadier, colder, more certain. I went inside, set my bag down, and immediately reached for my phone. There was one person I needed to talk to. Robert, I said when he answered. I need your help. Robert had been a friend of mine for over 20 years, and more importantly, he was a real estate attorney who didn't sugarcoat things. After a brief exchange of greetings, I explained everything: the mortgage, the ownership, the payments, and what I had seen that morning. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I expected. When I finished, there was a short pause before he spoke. All right, he said, his tone shifting into professional clarity. Here's where you stand. If your name is primary on both the deed and the mortgage, you have significant control over the property. You can't just walk away without consequences, but you absolutely have the right to force a sale. The word sale echoed in my mind. And if I do nothing? I asked. Then you continue exactly as you are, he replied, paying for a house that isn't benefiting you, while your financial position deteriorates. And if I force a sale? They'll have to either buy you out, which, based on what you've said, seems unlikely, or the house gets sold. Proceeds are divided according to ownership terms. I leaned back in my chair, processing everything. This will destroy my relationship with my son, I said quietly. Robert didn't hesitate. Beatrice, from what you've described, that relationship is already under strain. The question is whether you're willing to sacrifice your future to preserve the illusion of it. That hit harder than I expected. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, letting his words settle. Illusion. That was the right word, wasn't it? I had been holding on to something that no longer existed, convincing myself that things were fine because I wanted them to be. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. A message from Daniel. Mom, we really need to talk. This can't wait. I stared at the screen, then placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time, I didn't feel the urgency to respond immediately. I didn't feel the pull to fix things, to smooth things over, to make everything okay again. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at my yard, the one place that had always been mine, untouched by expectations or obligations. I thought about the years I had spent giving, supporting, sacrificing without question. I thought about the numbers on that page, the projections on Mrs. Clark's screen, the image of Clara laughing in a yard that I was paying for. And then, for the first time, I allowed myself to think something I had been avoiding for years. This wasn't just unfair. It was unsustainable. I picked up my phone again, not to respond to Daniel, but to make another call. This time, to a real estate agent I trusted. If I was going to make a decision, I needed to be fully prepared. No hesitation, no half measures. As the phone rang, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness, but something stronger. Resolve. Whatever came next, I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I also knew it was necessary. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to choose myself. By the end of that week, everything in my life felt like it had shifted into focus. Not softer, not easier, but clearer. I had met with the real estate agent, signed preliminary documents, and spoken again with Robert to make sure I understood every consequence of what I was about to do. There was no illusion left, no comforting lie I could hide behind. I knew exactly what this decision would cost me emotionally, and exactly what it would save me financially. The only thing left was to follow through. When the doorbell rang that evening, I already knew it would be them. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I walked to the door at a steady pace, opened it, and found Daniel and Clara standing there, just as I expected. Daniel looked tense, his shoulders tight, his eyes searching my face for something, maybe reassurance, maybe guilt. Clara looked irritated more than anything else, like this visit was an inconvenience she had been forced into. Mom, Daniel started, stepping inside before I even invited him. We need to talk. You're right, I said calmly, closing the door behind them. We do. They moved into the living room, and for a moment, I just watched them. The same room where birthdays had been celebrated, where laughter had once come easily, now felt like a stage for something entirely different. Clara remained standing, arms crossed, while Daniel paced slightly before finally turning toward me. You haven't been answering my messages, he said. I've been busy, I replied. With what? Clara asked sharply. Figuring things out, I said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Look, things are getting worse. We really need that money, Mom. This isn't a joke anymore. I tilted my head slightly. It didn't seem like a joke when I drove past your house yesterday. They both froze. Clara's expression changed first, a flicker of something defensive crossing her face. What are you talking about? The workers, I said evenly. The plans. The backyard. Daniel turned to her, confusion and suspicion mixing in his expression. Clara? It's not what you think, she said quickly. Then what is it?
I asked.
She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any explanation could have. It's just something we were considering, she said finally. A pool.
I asked.
Daniel's head snapped toward her.
A pool.
It's not finalized, she insisted. How much? I pressed. I've paid your mortgage, I continued. I've covered your emergencies. I've funded your lifestyle. That's not fair, Clara muttered. It's accurate, I corrected. I slid one page closer to them. This is a breakdown of everything I've contributed. Over $300,000. And that doesn't include the house itself. Daniel's face paled slightly as he scanned the numbers. Clara didn't even look. I didn't bring this up before because I didn't want it to feel like a transaction, I said. I wanted it to feel like family. And now it doesn't. Clara challenged. No, I said simply. Now it feels like obligation. And resentment. Silence settled over the room again, heavier this time. I went to the bank, I continued. I reviewed my finances. And I spoke to a lawyer. Daniel looked up quickly. A lawyer? Yes, I said, because I needed to understand my options. And Clara asked, her tone sharp. And I've made a decision, I said. I took a breath, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the words to land exactly as they needed to. I am no longer going to pay the mortgage on your house. Daniel's reaction was immediate. What? Mom, you can't just. I can, I said calmly. And I am. That will ruin us, he said, panic creeping into his voice.
No, irrablia.
What will ruin you is continuing to live beyond your means without taking responsibility. Clara stood up abruptly. This is unbelievable. You're punishing us. I'm not punishing you, I said, looking at her steadily. I'm setting a boundary. You're throwing us out of our home, she snapped. It's not your home, I said. It's mine, legally and financially. Her eyes flashed with anger. After everything we've done. I almost smiled at that, not out of amusement, but disbelief. What exactly have you done, Clara? I asked. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Daniel stood again, his voice desperate now. Mom, please. We can figure something out. Just give us more time. I've given you 10 years, I said gently. Time isn't the issue. So what happens now? He asked. I slid another document across the table. The house is being listed for sale. The words seemed to hit them both at once. You can't do that, Clara said immediately. I can, I replied. And the process has already started. Daniel looked like he might collapse. Where are we supposed to go? That's something you need to figure out, I said. You'll receive a portion of the sale, enough to help you transition. But after that, you're on your own. Clara let out a sharp, bitter laugh. So this is who you really are? No, I said quietly. This is who I've always been. I just stopped ignoring it. You're going to regret this, she said, grabbing her purse. When you're alone. I met her gaze, without flinching. I'd rather be alone than used. Daniel lingered a moment longer, his expression torn between anger and something else, something closer to realization. Mom, he started, but the words didn't come. It's time, Daniel, I said softly. He nodded slowly, though it didn't look like acceptance yet, just shock. Then he turned and followed Clara out the door. When the door closed behind them, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was steady. I sat down in my chair, letting the moment settle around me. My hands were calm. My mind was clear. There was sadness, of course. There always would be, but it wasn't overwhelming.
It didn't control me.
For the first time in years, I hadn't fixed anything. I hadn't given in. I had simply drawn a line. And I knew, deep down, that everything after this, no matter how difficult, would finally be built on something real. A year can change everything, but not in the dramatic, instant way people expect. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't feel like transformation while you're in the middle of it. For me, it was slower, quieter, more like layers peeling away than something new being built all at once. The first few months after I forced the sale of the house were the hardest. Harder than the confrontation, harder than the decision itself. Because once everything was set in motion, there was nothing left to distract me from the reality of what I had done. Daniel and Clara had reacted exactly as expected. Anger, accusations, silence. Clara didn't speak to me at all after that day. Not once. From what I heard through Janet, she told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned them, that I had ruined their stability, that I had turned my back on my own family. Some people believed her. That part hurt more than I thought it would. Not because I needed their approval, but because it forced me to accept that doing the right thing doesn't always look right from the outside. Daniel was different. At first, he was just as angry. His messages were short, sharp, filled with frustration and disbelief. He couldn't understand why I would do this to them, as if the years leading up to that moment didn't exist. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. The messages became less frequent, then quieter, then eventually stopped altogether. For a while, we didn't speak at all. And that silence, it was heavy in a different way than before. Not suffocating, but uncertain. Like standing on unfamiliar ground and not knowing if it would hold. The house sold faster than any of us expected. The market had been strong, and despite the unfinished backyard project, the location alone made it valuable. I followed through on everything I had promised. Daniel received his share, enough to get him into a small apartment and cover initial expenses. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't comfortable in the way he had been used to, but it was real. And for the first time in his adult life, it was something he had to manage on his own. I sold my house shortly after. That decision surprised even me, but once I made it, it felt inevitable. The place had been filled with memories, yes, but also with expectations I no longer wanted to carry. I didn't need the space anymore, and I didn't need to stay tied to a version of my life that no longer fit. I found a small coastal cottage about 30 minutes away, nothing extravagant, but peaceful in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. The first night I slept there, I woke up to the sound of waves instead of silence, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Rebuilding my finances became a priority, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like reclaiming something that had always been mine. With the proceeds from both sales and careful planning, my retirement was no longer something I feared. I wasn't rich, and I didn't need to be. Stability, I realized, was worth far more than excess. For the first time in decades, I knew exactly where I stood, and that knowledge brought a kind of peace I hadn't experienced in years. But the biggest changes weren't financial. They were personal. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. I started doing things I had put off for years, not because I couldn't do them, but because I had always been too focused on someone else's needs. I picked up painting again, something I had loved when I was younger, but abandoned somewhere along the way. At first, it felt strange, like trying to reconnect with someone I used to know. But slowly, it came back to me. The colors, the focus, the quiet satisfaction of creating something just for the sake of it. My cottage walls began to fill with landscapes and seascapes, each one a small reminder that I still had parts of myself left to rediscover. I also allowed myself to build new routines. Simple things, like morning walks by the water or evenings spent reading without interruption. I joined a small book club in town, not because I needed company, but because I wanted connection on my own terms. The people there didn't know my past, didn't see me as someone who provided or sacrificed. To them, I was just Beatrice. And that, more than anything, felt like freedom. Dorothy, remained a constant through all of it. She visited often, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting with me in comfortable silence. She never said, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. Instead, she simply watched as I found my footing, offering support when I needed it and space when I didn't. "Do you regret it?" she asked me once, as we sat on the deck watching the sun dip into the horizon. I thought about it carefully before answering. Not the easy version of the question, but the honest one. "I regret how long it took me to see things clearly," I said. "But not the decision itself." She nodded, as if that was exactly what she expected me to say. It was nearly 9 months before Daniel reached out again. His message was simple.
No demands, no urgency. Just a question asking if we could talk.
I stared at it for a long time before responding, not because I didn't want to answer, but because I wanted to be sure I was ready. And when I finally said yes, it wasn't out of obligation. It was a choice. The first conversation was awkward, careful. We both spoke like we were navigating unfamiliar territory, which, in a way, we were. But there was something different in his tone. Less entitlement, more awareness. He didn't ask for anything. Not once. Instead, he apologized. Not vaguely, not defensively, but clearly. For everything. It didn't erase the past, and I didn't expect it to. But it mattered. Over time, we started to rebuild something, not what we had before, but something healthier. He told me about his new job, about the second job he had taken to stay afloat, about the challenges he was finally facing on his own. It wasn't easy for him. I could hear that. But for the first time, I also heard something else.
Growth.
Clara, as expected, remained distant. Eventually, I learned that they had separated. The pressure of their situation, combined with the loss of the lifestyle they had built, had exposed cracks that money had once hidden. I didn't feel satisfaction in that. Just confirmation. Some things can't survive without constant support, and maybe they're not meant to. The day Daniel visited my cottage for the first time, I felt a quiet sense of closure. Not an ending, but a transition. He looked around, taking in the space, the simplicity, the calm. "It suits you," he said. I smiled. "It finally does." We talked for hours that day, not about money or problems, but about life. Real life. The kind we hadn't shared in years. And when he left, there was no tension, no expectation, just understanding. That night, I stood on my deck alone, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was cool, the sound of the ocean steady and grounding. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, tired, stretched thin, constantly giving without question. And I thought about the woman I was now. Not perfect, not without scars, but stronger, clearer, whole in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. I hadn't lost my family. I had redefined it. And in doing so, I had finally found something I didn't even know I was searching for. A life that belonged to me.